Dr. Gary P. Zola is our next presenter. Dr. Zola is the executive director. Dr. Zola is the executive director of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives, AJA, the largest research center dedicated solely to the study of the American Jewish experience. Dr. Zola is also professor of the American Jewish experience at HUC-JIR in Cincinnati. Under his leadership, the AJA has expanded its collection, built new structures, and expanded the public's access. Dr. Zola specializes in the development of American Reform Judaism and is a presidential appointee to the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. So that's his formal bio. On a personal level, I just want to share that Gary is a longtime friend and colleague. For WRJ, he has been an advisor, as you heard from Lynn earlier today, adjunct staff of WRJ for this year, but truly an advisor for all things related to our centennial. Not only this event, and the AJA is our full partner in this event and everything that you're seeing here today, working so closely with the scholars and with us, but also exhibits that are at the AJA in Cincinnati, in the New York office of the Union for Reform Judaism, and will be at the Biennial Assembly coming up in San Diego. He helped us establish the WRJ collection at the archives that Dr. Sarna mentioned, as well as archival collections for dozens of sisterhoods and women's groups throughout North America. He's been a guest speaker at numerous sisterhoods as part of our centennial and been available for any and everything we've asked. He's a true friend and colleague, and I just love him, and I'm so delighted to be able to introduce him.
In her highly acclaimed autobiography titled Dust Tracks on a Road, the famous African-American writer Zora Neale Hurston offered up a wonderful definition of research. Research, she wrote, is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose. Well, this unique symposium on the women of Reform Judaism testifies to the veracity of Hurston's observation. For more than 2 years now, many distinguished historians, along with countless researchers, have been poking and prying into the annals of sisterhood's extraordinarily valuable collection, housed, incidentally, at the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives. Now, research is indeed the cornerstone of the science of history. The diligent and conscientious researcher knows that one must delve deeply into any research topic if one hopes to produce useful results. In fact, the most dedicated researchers, I'd like to include myself in that group, always strive actively to engage with the primary sources. And one who hopes to fully appreciate WRJ's remarkable legacy must learn to live, literally live, with the original sources. For example, if one strives to understand what transpired back in 1913, when the delegates from around the country established the world's first Jewish women's congregational organization, one must literally project oneself into that setting if one hopes to properly reconstruct the past. And of course, if one hopes accurately to comprehend the spirit of volunteerism that has animated and invigorated the social action work that the members of WRJ have done over the years, the researcher must strive personally to become engaged with the subject at hand. The many, many fine scholars who've contributed their wonderful articles to this new volume that will detail for the very first time the history of WRJ will assure you that in order to accurately understand the many distinctive projects and initiatives that have ennobled this organization's historical reputation, like, for example, what we heard from Professor Sarna and from Dr. Herman, WRJ's noteworthy devotion to the rise and growth of the Jewish Braille Institute, then the student must literally strive to bring that story to life. All in all, the earnest historical researcher will make every effort to become a part of the warp and the woof of history, or to make use of a phrase made famous 60 years ago by CBS, both on radio and TV, the historical researcher must make every effort to help the student feel as though Okay, have you had an entertaining lunch? Now, in 1904, nearly a full decade before the founding of the National Federation of Temple Sisterhoods, Rabbi Hyman G. Enelow, then serving Adith Israel Congregation of Louisville, Kentucky, addressed the congregation's sisterhood on the first anniversary of its founding. Rabbi Enelow's words are preserved at the American Jewish Archives, and they seem to be particularly relevant to an occasion such as this. The work of the sisterhood is only budding forth. Its flowers are hid in the future. The distant day they shall fill with sweet fragrance. Throughout the course of this centennial year, those of us who have been exploring WRJ's record of achievement cannot help but confess that today, with the benefit of 100-year-long retrospect, Rabbi Enelow's words seem to have been so genuinely prescient. The fine lectures and addresses that we've been hearing all day buttress this assertion. Returning now to Rabbi Enelow's imagery, we all must agree that the history of WRJ is a veritable greenhouse filled with metaphoric flowers, an impressive bouquet of achievements that have unquestionably contributed to the betterment of our movement, of our people, and without exaggeration, to good people everywhere. This lens, the lens of our symposium, has understandably been focused on the remarkable achievements that have been wrought by NFTS WRJ over the past century, but I don't want this occasion to go by and not remind ourselves that the creation of a dynamic National Association of Synagogue Women, it did not occur by way of spontaneous combustion. It would not have been possible to create an NFTS in 1913 had there not been, prior to that, dozens of grassroots women's auxiliaries that had come into existence over the last few decades of the 19th century. Had the women in these synagogue auxiliaries not found the idea of a national federation of women's groups appealing and needed, then it is, by deduction, possible to understand that NFTS itself would not have succeeded. NFTS's instantaneous success testifies to the fact. Did I say something wrong? I can belt it out, believe me. Students at the college know Dr. Marcus used to always say, if you've been, Dr. Marcus used to say, no rabbi who cannot be heard from the pulpit of Plum Street Temple out into the street itself is worthy of his title. So I'm going to carry on. So in order to understand why NFTS blossomed so rapidly during its first years of existence, let us now turn our attention to the women who were already involved in the Reform synagogues throughout North America in some cases literally decades before the founding of NFTS. Toward the end of the fin de siècle, toward the end of the 19th century and the dawn of the 20th century, a growing number of women were already actively involved in Reform synagogues, and many of these women were being influenced by the rhetoric of what was then called the woman's emancipation movement. The woman's emancipation movement was a very significant theme in American history during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, the suffragette movement is probably the best known component of the woman's emancipation movement, but as we heard from Professor Fishman, there were many other facets, including women who engaged openly in political debate, women who were fighting for better working conditions and equal pay for equal labor, women who assumed leadership roles in a wide array of social betterment causes. The new ideas that energized supporters of the women's emancipation movement simultaneously influenced many American Jewish women, some of whom were actively involved in their synagogue's ladies' auxiliaries. Each temple had a woman's auxiliary with its own moniker, and there existed a colorful array of names of these groups, such as the temple's sewing club, the temple's Ladies' Aid Society, the temple's Women's Social Club, and so forth. The ladies of Temple Kahal Kadosh Beth Elohim in Charleston, South Carolina, boasted what may have been the most memorable name of all. They called themselves the Temple's Happy Workers Club. Now, the influence of women's emancipation movement prompted some of these women in the synagogue auxiliaries, particularly the younger women, to reconceptualize the fundamental mission of these various independent ladies' auxiliaries. They believed that Reform Judaism, and we heard this earlier today, and the Reform synagogue were naturally allied with the aspirations of the modern 20th century American woman. They were exhilarated by the idea that women's groups affiliated with the Reform Temple could become vehicles that helped women in general to achieve new levels of social recognition, communal involvement, political influence. And many of our Reform rabbis, men like Emil G. Hirsch in Chicago and J. Leonard Levy in Pittsburgh and Max Heller in New Orleans, just by a few examples. These rabbis spoke out against social injustice all over the country, and in doing so, many women were inspired to become involved in these concerns. These challenges, friends, don't bother me at all. I work at the Hebrew Union College. It is important to bear in mind that the term sisterhood, a name that would increasingly begin to be used by these ladies' auxiliary groups, this term was not a deprecatory term at all. It resonated with political overtones. It was a term that implied sororal solidarity on behalf of the advancement of women. Now, this morning you heard Dr. Nadel speak to us about Carrie Obendorfer Simon, the founding president of NFTS. Simon deeply believed that the ladies' auxiliaries in the synagogue should aspire to reach for more ambitious achievements. As we've already learned, Simon respected deeply the charitable acts and the domestic endeavors that typified the activities of the ladies' auxiliaries. But she was also convinced that women were duty-bound to be more active contributors to the practical life of the congregation. It is also important to remember that Simon herself, and this is the main thrust of what I wanted to teach today, she was a Reform Jewish partisan. She was passionately committed to the belief that the women of our temples had to be participants in religious reform. This was what made them unique and different from other female benevolent societies and a host of other women's organizations that existed at that time. And so Simon repeatedly called on her synagogue sisters to involve themselves in temple duties. Their responsibility to the synagogue need not be confined, as we've heard, and as she would later put it, to polishing the handle on the big front door, but rather the women of Reform Judaism were fully capable of organizing religious schools, serving as Jewish educators, writing Jewish literature, and participating fully in the realm of Jewish and adult education. In short, NFTS's first president, along with the many peers who elected her to that high office, believed that enfranchised women must become proponents of Reform Judaism. They wanted their National Federation of Temple Sisterhoods to empower women and concomitantly to strengthen the Reform Synagogue and to thereby benefit all of Judaism and all of American society. Now, during the first years of her presidency and shortly after she voluntarily stepped down from leadership, Carrie Simon staked out NFTS's claim on three crucially important and previously forbidden territories for women in the Reform Synagogue. And these three pioneering initiatives have had a transformative effect on the evolvement of American Reform Judaism. These are they. First, Carrie Simon fought to see that NFTS women had full access to synagogue governance, what she once called, to use her words, quote, the very sanctum of the temple. In 1923, as we heard, at her urging, delegates at the UAHC biennial adopted an NFTS resolution calling on the UAHC to place a woman on its board of governors. Carrie then would return to Washington, D.C., and with that resolution in hand, she managed to become the first woman appointed to the board of Washington Hebrew Congregation, where her husband was the rabbi. This meant that Carrie Simon would be a voting member of WHC's Board of Trustees, in contrast to her husband, the congregation's rabbi, who had no such privilege since he was an ex officio member of the board. In addition to her determination to secure what she would call a place at the table of authority for women in the synagogue and in the union, Simon wanted women to become emissaries of American Reform Judaism. And she urged her sisters to take religion seriously. She told them religion should be a part of our daily breathing and thinking. The women of the Reform Synagogue should be advocates for our progressive religious practice and democratic ideals. So in 1915, 2 years after becoming president, Simon was invited to the 24th Council of the UAHC when it met in Chicago. And in the course of this address, Simon sounded a call for an active missionary campaign 65 years before Alexander Schindler revivified this same exact initiative under the new banner of outreach. Simon urged Reform congregations to welcome non-Jews married to Jews into the Jewish fold. Here, let her speak for herself. Let it be noted that there are many not of Israel by birth or by intermarriage, but who are intellectually and theologically at one with us. There never was a time when the world gave the Jew so respectful a hearing, and never was a time when the teachings of Israel could find so large an audience. I believe that we in American Israel should not be afraid to claim our children everywhere and to proclaim our message anywhere. Finally, it was Carrie Simon who repeatedly and courageously gave voice to the conviction that the institutions of Reform Judaism ought to encourage women to function as religious educators and as spiritual leaders. In 1921, at the 27th Biennial Assembly of the UAHC in Buffalo, Simon publicly and straightforwardly urged the idea of women entering the Reform rabbinate. She told the delegates that there was no good reason why a woman could not minister to the minds that are unhappy and to the people that are seeking the comfort of God. And in a stirring address, she rhetorically asked, "Are there not Jewish young women in our land whose intensity of religious feeling is such and whose mental outlook is broad enough to urge them to enter the ministry? Have we not women who are willing to concentrate their talents to the profession which is to the Jew the most exalted in the world? Of course, we will be told all the 101 objections that traditional Judaism will raise. But stimulating our women into this type of leadership will outweigh anything that can be offered to the contrary." Two decades later, when NFTS was marking its silver jubilee, 2 decades later, Carrie Simon was still predicting that women would one day soon enter the rabbinate. Who knows, she said at that occasion, but that before many decades, women will also be in the ministry of preaching. Now, in conclusion, friends, let's consider how each of these 3 initiatives, remember, these initiatives were innovative ideas a century ago. Consider how they have flowered over this period of time. Before the establishment of NFTS, women's auxiliaries in the synagogues were often viewed by men as mere garniture. On the margins, women played no meaningful role in the governance of our synagogues. Their intellectual contributions to the ideals of Reform Judaism were wholly unsolicited, and the prospect of women functioning as respected spiritual and educational leaders seemed to be, at best, quixotic. Today, on temple boardrooms, in classrooms, in scholarly volumes, in institutions of higher Jewish learning in general, in our schools, in the cantorate, and in the rabbinate, we can clearly see how Simon's budding initiatives have fructified over the past century. And as we scan through a few of WRJ's most historic documents, all of which are professionally and lovingly preserved in the American Jewish Archives, which, by the way, as you know, is our movement's world-famous archival center for the study of American Jewish experience. We can see how many other buds have blossomed over the past century. And we can even retrieve voices from our archives, voices that have left us now, sadly, long ago, but voices who are still eloquent, can still be heard in the glory of their time, and can serve today, if we let them, to be a fitting summation to the overall influence that NFTS has had on American Reform Judaism.
Our religious community owes its life to sisterhood. But what I say applies not only to a national level, it applies even more to the grassroots, to our member congregations. And anyone who knows anything about the history of the Reformed Jewish community knows that without sisterhood there would have been no congregations. And it is therefore sisterhood that can claim primary responsibility for making Judaism come to life in the hearts of our young people.
Friends, this week's parashah is Korach. And Korach, a story all about men, is rife with conflict, with treachery, and with revolt. But take a look in the fifth aliyah of our portion, and you'll read about a fabulous occurrence which proves conclusively that Aaron and his posterity were God's true choice for the priestly caste. How do we know? Well, the proof comes through the test of the staves. Each of the 12 ancestral tribes gave a staff to Moses. Moses placed them all in the Ohel Ha'edut, the tent of the covenant, and the next day, Moses entered the tent, and he saw that only Aaron's staff, which represented the tribe of Levi, had begun to sprout. And according to the Torah, it budded, it blossomed, and it produced almonds all at the same time. And the 13th century biblical commentator, known to the rabbis as Chizkuni, he is credited for noting that with just a little minor change in vocalization, the Hebrew word for almond, shaked, will become shoked, a verb that means to have watchful determination, to have fortitude, to have resolve, to have tenacity. Well, the lesson in this coincidence of parshiot is valuable for us here. For the efflorescence of any collaborative institution or organization, whether that be the Aaronite priesthood of yore or a contemporary communal endeavor, it always depends upon its partisans in every age and in every era to have watchful passion and unflinching resolve. And for the past century, as we have now amply proven, the WRJ NFTS has been blessed with just this spirit. Like Aaron's remarkable staff, described in our reading, this association has nurtured at the same time hopeful buds, dreams of a progressive dynamic, and a promise of a flowering American Jewish future. So on this day, we see that, like Aaron's staff, the buds are flowering, they've borne fruit. And as WRJ begins now, as Dr. Sarna said, its second century, we have to be watchful. We have to be determined in our resolve. With this spirit, then Rabbi Enelow's words spoken 110 years ago will have new meaning for us today. The work of the sisterhood is only budding forth. Its flowers are hid in the future. The distant day they shall fill with sweet fragrance. And it was Mary Antin, that East European Jewish immigrant turned best-selling American author, who once remarked in a work that was written at the dawn of the 20th century, "It is not I that belong to the past, but it is the past that belongs to me." The WRJ begins its second century. Let us have resolve to take possession of a great past, which is ours, and use it to preserve and enhance the immortal spirit of what is, without question, the fuel that sustains us as an Am Olam, as an eternal people. Thank you very much.